Welcome to Philly Coco Presents Side Project Spotlight, Episode 50. This is a developer's journey to making cool stuff. I'm Kotaro, and we are Philly Coco, a Philadelphia-based Cocoa Heads community focused on Apple development that primarily, but not exclusively, means iOS, Mac, tvOS, watchOS, and visionOS development. Philly Coco's true desire is to take you higher on your own developer journey. Ooh. All right, so it's not obvious. Running a little bit solo today. It's partially my fault because of personal stuff. Trying to also enjoy the Labor Day weekend. So that's the reason for this very short podcast. I also want to apologize for the very messy audio that's going on. I'm currently recording in a kitchen next to a window and probably next to some noise. So you might hear a few things in the background if that's okay. One of the things that I did want to talk a little bit about is this idea about reading Apple's tea leaves that they sort of provide for us over time. I think we tend to sort of try to forecast what Apple is doing based on what they've sort of provided, sort of the breadcrumbs of different sort of technologies that ultimately culminate into something like a visionOS or like a watchOS. So in some cases, if you look back in hindsight, you could see year over year, they were investing a lot of energy around AR, some extent VR, but mostly AR, and a lot of it around stuff even that's non-obvious. So like CoreML with object detection, and hand gesture detection. It would recognize your index of hands, your facial detections, and all these things that sort of require the camera and AR to sort of explore seeing things. They would sort of expand upon it with Reality Composer, where you construct these, where you can construct the scenes with 3D assets in it much more easily. Creating CreateML, for which then you can create assets very easily, and ultimately, using a series of photographs. And now, with the latest version of the iOS 15, iOS 15, you can actually set up a frame. You have a framework that allows you to scan any object, that's within reasonable size, a 360 manner, and then it would use point clouds to generate a 3D asset. If any game developers out there would look at that, maybe they might not like it so much, but in terms of it being an optimized 3D mesh. But at the same time, if you're looking at it from far away, or even if it's relatively close, it's relatively easy to do, and so you can implement a lot of your assets very quickly that way. So again, back to this idea about and what does that ultimately mean, right? So like, in a way, it allows for developers who are not well versed in creating 3D assets to quickly create 3D assets, let's say of a shoe or a plant or food items even, and get them into their app very quickly, instead of having to depend on somebody with that skill set. Because making 3D assets, particularly of that quality, is very hard. But again, one of the things that I think that's interesting, especially when we were indie developers at the time, was this idea that we kind of had to anticipate what Apple was trying to tell us through, because Apple couldn't tell us a lot of times. So stuff like size classing, so we would kind of get a hint like, well, don't start depending on, back in the day, you can easily hard code your heights and width based on screen sizes at a point level, because you pretty much are guaranteed that the hardware would be at that size for the majority of these devices. And then slowly Apple had said, don't depend on that for too long, because we're kind of moving into this other space. So, of course, the people who didn't pay attention to those tea leaves ended up having to do a lot of work to sort of refactor to a variety of different size classes and different aspect ratios. So one of the things that I tend to like to do a lot nowadays is sort of kind of see what sort of frameworks and technologies Apple reveals at WWDC and sort of speculate on where they can go. Again, speculation usually is a bad thing, but sometimes with Apple, if you guess right and you get your apps in place, it saves you a lot of pain in the future. Widgets being one of the examples, recent examples, for which for longest it was argued, what's the point of widgets, particularly because of their static nature. And I think one of the things that's hard for people who are product owners was hard for them is to understand, oh, this is not inside the app. Why would I want to have it? It strikes them maybe as it's a power user tool, not so much or option. It's non-obvious. So why should we spend resources and time building it? But contrary to that, now, because if you have widgets, it can be exposed in a multitude of platforms in a variety of different ways, whether you can repurpose it for like activity, you can have it on a watch, you can have it on a phone, you can have it in standby mode. Your app's exposed in a variety of different ways that can link back to your core app, but it also, you can argue it's something like a pseudo bookmark in a lot of ways, and it allows the users to sort of come back to your app and engage with it in a much more proactive way. The other one that I look at about SharePlay was a funny example of me initially thinking, when the Freeform app came out, which Freeform app, for people who don't know, is Apple's free app that allows you to draw a lot of vector art and note-taking, kind of like allows you to draw a much more graphical set of notes that you then can share with colleagues and even collaborate with colleagues using the SharePlay group activity framework. And at the time, I thought, well, it's a cute demo, but why would Apple spend so much time making this app a big deal? Well, when visionOS came out, that's when it clicked that, oh, this is one of the tools they would want to use for you to whiteboard ideas with other people in virtual space. And that's why it exists. So sometimes, what's not so obvious in the beginning becomes blatantly obvious now. It's the same with ARKit and RealityKit. At the time, it wasn't quite clear whether or not it was just Apple just shooting at the hips and hoping to see what sticks, or that they had some kind of long-term vision in mind. And with some exceptions for sure, I think a lot of times they try to have a long-term vision or goal with a lot of the stuff that they put out, and it's usually a good idea to sort of keep that in mind when you're taking advantage or deciding on which frameworks to work with, because sometimes there's frameworks where you're like, I don't know if this has any life. I look at like SpriteKit and SceneKit as sort of like, they're not necessarily dead-end technologies, but they're not necessarily, they've not been updated in forever. Same with PencilKit. So do you want to attach your wagon to something that may not see any new updates for a long time, or may eventually be deprecated over time and replaced with something new? That's something that you have to consider when you sort of work on Apple products and rely on Apple frameworks. Probably better not to rely on your core component, your core feature to be dependent on Apple for those reasons alone. So those are some, to some level, some obvious tea leaves. Some of the ones that are interesting might have to do with Swift data, now making it easier, maybe not easy, easier to deal with core data, and ultimately core data CloudKit sync, for which I think has huge potential for any indie developers that just want to have a very boutique style app but they allow for the users to back up their data online and sort of utilize it cross device. I think that's actually a nice feature to have that you can get for I wouldn't say for free, but relatively easier than maybe spinning up a Firebase SDK. Doxy is another example of something that I think over time has slowly been improving, helping developers sort of create and document their code and their app in a much better, much easier way, and it fits better with their workflows versus like having to just sort of make a Confluence page that is notoriously janky and long and ultimately overwritten and outdated before long. So I think there's something there to that effect, along with macros being something where you can take complex templates of code and refactor them into sort of nice little properties or nice little macros, I should say, that ultimately can kind of like keep it concise and outside of concerns of bad implementations of a templated set of code. We'll see how that goes. I've noticed that there's been some weirdness with a variety of different betas going forward with dealing with macros. So it's very clearly a very hard thing to actually get right. So, but applause to Apple for trying to do something very compelling in that sense. I also think interactive widgets, which I'm pretty sure is already a thing in Android, but it's something that I don't think people will really get a handle of for at least another year. Same with how widgets were. And in a sense that it's sort of your, think of it like a bookmark for users to use to get back into your app. And what I always used to tell my stakeholders a lot is like, we should put in some effort building these widgets because they take up like 4 icon screens, by themselves, 4 icon spaces by themselves. I mean, don't you want that real estate? For which then, it's kind of a shrug and we move on. So many stakeholders are still caught in this idea that their app is the center of the universe, and they have to sort of compel people to get into that universe constantly for engagement reasons or whatever. So it still confuses me. Well, that's one way you can do it out of a myriad of ways. And I say this as and that's more of a broad sort of critique about development, not people that don't develop for widgets, but also sort of an interesting thing where now Apple this year has said, we're going to have widgets everywhere: watchOS, tvOS, not tvOS, maybe not there, watchOS, iOS, macOS, visionOS, maybe. If not, then it's coming because there's almost no reason not to have it. At least that's my opinion. I would really enjoy this idea that maybe they would take those widgets and make them much closer to like a HUD that kind of locks to the cameras. Maybe a future tea leaf that I've noticed a lot recently has been a lot of WWDC videos around Unity, where the expectation is that you would mostly use it for either sort of AR, very highly interactive AR experiences, and immersive gameplays, more to the sense of like if you're a game developer and you already have a game in Unity, let's say like a Beat Saber type game, porting it over to visionOS hypothetically won't be as dramatic as one might think. Maybe the only thing you would have to do is sort of reset the way the controls work, since most likely you would have to figure out a way to make it easier to understand hand gestures, which in Unity, I'm sure they have some basic support, if not some really robust support. I kind of go back and forth. It just depends on the framework in that space at that time. But that's my current speculation, or the current tea leaves that I'm personally reading. I should probably make sure to preference this as this is not financial advice or anything where we are speaking any sort of truth or we know anything substantial behind the scenes. This is us speculating, and this particular podcast is just for educational and entertainment purposes only. Thankfully, I got that out of the way. So I think that'll be all for today. You can learn more about Philly Cocoa at phillycocoa.org. There you'll find links to our Slack group, meetup schedule, and contact info. If you're feeling generous, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your podcast platform of choice is, and share us with all your developer friends. And one more thing, our not a sponsor shout out goes out to our good friend Clipdish. You can find the app at getclipdish.com. Clipdish is an app that promotes this idea of being able to not have to go and find your recipes online and then have to, sift through a ton of ads before you can actually get the key instructions and ingredients. It will scrape that all for you and actually present it in a nice, presentable manner. And you can save it locally on your app as many as you would like. It is a subscription-based app, but from what I see, the deal is quite good and reasonable. So it's also made with love in Bucks County, PA. So check it out, getclipdish.com. I always enjoy promoting local brands because they're awesome people. Until then, good luck on your own developer journey. We will cheer for you